Now in this lesson, let's see how to use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs. You can use, for example, PowerShell or Postman to query the data which is generated by Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. First, let's see API basics in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Administration portal. So first, we will go to Partners and APIs, and there we will select API Explorer. So here, under Sample Queries is a list of default queries which are available to you. If you click on any of these, you will notice that each and every default query will have a different resource identifier link next to Run Query button. Here you can see that this link is different. And this link is so-called URI. And you will also notice that next to Run Query you can choose to select Get, Post, Put, Patch, Delete and Options. One more thing to show is that if I select any of these available sample queries, for example, let's choose Get 10 Latest Alerts, and if I select Run Query, this is an example of sample query provided by Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and here you can see results. Or we can, for example, query to see Get 10 Latest Reported Devices, and again Run Query. Later in video we will show how you can run your custom queries to retrieve data which is not provided by these sample queries. For example, alerts in past 48 hours. So here in the first row of response body you can see API-EU.SecurityCenter in the link which is used to query data from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. If I go now to Settings, Endpoints, Data Retention, you can see under Data Storage that Europe is selected. You remember that we talked about that in one of the first sections about data storage. Basically, if we have selected United States for data storage during tenant setup, our link for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data query would be API-US.SecurityCenter. And if we have selected United Kingdom for data storage during tenant setup, our link for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data query would be API-UK.SecurityCenter. We have only these three options available. This is good to mention because of latency and other reasons. It is best to use your closest data center location. So now that we have seen default or sample queries, first thing when we speak about custom queries is that we need to have Azure Active Directory registered application to query Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data, since API access requires Open Authorization 2.0 protocol for accessing, which basically in its essence allows someone from outside, or to say some third-party sites or applications to access Microsoft Defender for Endpoint's protected resources, such as APIs. And as you may know, Open Authorization 2.0 protocol for accessing is used with Azure Active Directory for identity management purposes. That Azure Active Directory registered application must have appropriate permissions for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data, which you want to query with some tool like PowerShell or Postman, is basically protected with Azure Active Directory. That is why we need to have dedicated Azure Active Directory application with appropriate permissions to wanted sets of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs. And we will use that Azure Active Directory application to access Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs through it, since this application gives us permission to pass Azure Active Directory protection and access Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs, using, for example, PowerShell or Postman. For purposes of this demonstration, I already have such application created in my Azure Active Directory. Let me show you that. So I will go first to Office 365 Administration Center, here from Security Portal. It should load in a second. And from here I select Show All. And we need to go to Azure Active Directory of this tenant. So here we need to select Azure Active Directory once again. And we need to go to App Registrations. And here you can see I have already created Cloud Application 1 application, which was created specifically for purposes of accessing Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs. So if I click on Cloud Application 1, next I will need to click on API Permissions. And here you can see for which Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs this application is authorized to call. I granted these permissions manually when I was creating this application. And if I select here Add a permission, I need to select next APIs my organization uses. And now we need to type Windows. And here we need to select Windows Defender ATP. And we will select Application Permissions. And now here you can see the list of all Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs that can be queried. You can see I already selected once. And these are the ones which we saw previously. Now, if I go back on Certificates and Secrets of Cloud Application 1, let's go there. I need to close this. And once again we open Cloud Application 1 and we go to Certificates and Secrets. Here I can see Client Secret Value. This is visible only immediately after application creation, so I have previously saved this value here in my notepad. You can see it here, secret key. And now, if I go to Overview of this Cloud Application 1, I need to copy application or client ID to my notepad. So let's copy. And let's type here client ID and paste it, because I will need that later. Directory or tenant ID is something I will need as well later, so let's copy this again to Notepad. So this is tenant ID, and let's paste it here. So we will use this client ID, secret key and tenant ID of Cloud Application 1 to access Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data in a way that with PowerShell or Post. So we will use this client ID, tenant ID and secret key of Cloud Application 1 to access Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data with PowerShell or Postman, for example. We request and get token, and then to use that token to reach wanted Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs. Let's see how we can access wanted Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs using PowerShell. So now I am connected to my tenant with PowerShell ISE using global administrator credentials, and I will run this script here. So in this script, you can see that I replaced tenant ID, application ID and application secret with ones I already copied from my tenant. This script will return to me a value of token which I will need to access wanted Microsoft Defender for Endpoint APIs, as we explained previously. So let's run this script. So I will select all of these and I will run this section. So here, below return token, you can see token value. Now we need to save this script to a location from where I am executing these PowerShell commands, because I will call this script in next script I will execute, because next script will retrieve wanted APIs. And to do it, it will need token value which is retrieved by this script, this value you are looking at now. So to do that, I will go to File, Save As, and you can see that this is exact location from which I am executing these PowerShell commands. And now I need to name this get minus token. And type is going to be PS1. And I will save that script in that location. We named this get minus token because that name is used in following script. And now, here in Notepad, you can see following script that will retrieve past 48 hours alerts from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint using APIs. So let's copy that script to PowerShell. There it is. Now we paste this script to PowerShell. And let's execute it. So we need to select all this script content and once again run section. Now let's open location where we will see output of this executed script. So this is location, and you can see these most recent two files. These are JSON and CSV files, and these are the files which were generated by this script we executed previously. So if I open, for example, that generated JSON file, there it is, and we can see here all alerts in past 48 hours, alongside with all of their details. Not too many of them. So now, let's see how you can access Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data with another tool besides PowerShell, and that is Postman. Now, if I open my Postman console, and now we need to go to the new HTTP request, and we need to select authorization here. And as a type of authorization, we will select obviously OAuth 2.0. Since that is authorization protocol we are using for Azure Active Directory Identity Management, as we have explained previously. Now we need to fill in all the details required to retrieve token to access. So first we need to type token name. Let's type token1, doesn't really matter for this example. And important thing, right next to get we need to type HTTP. And this is the URI link we need to paste right next to get. As we told, token name is token1. Grant type will be client credentials. And now we need this access token URL. To retrieve it, let's go to Azure Active Directory. And here on Cloud Application 1 application, in the overview Endpoints, let's select Endpoints. And we will copy OAuth 2.0 token endpoint. This one. And now let's go back to Postman console. And let's paste this to access token URL. There it is. We need to paste as well client ID and secret ID. We will paste it from our notepad. We could copy that values also from Azure Active Directory, but I already have them in a notepad from previous demonstration. So let's copy them as well. Here is client ID. And here is secret key or client secret. And now we can select Get New Access Token. Here we can see authentication is complete. And we will select Use Token. This is similar to the step which we did with first PowerShell script, where we retrieved token to be able for further custom querying on Microsoft Defender for endpoint data. Now, if we click Send, we will query all APIs. It should be in a moment. Now, if we would click send, we would query all APIs. And here, right next to get, next to APIs, if we add alerts, for example, and then if we would click send again, we would query all alerts from APIs. If you wish to know what are endpoint URIs you can query, you can check Microsoft's official documentation on endpoint URI and versioning. And that's it for this lesson. In next and last video of 7th module, we will summarize everything we have learned in module 7.